Commander Vekthor stared at the display screen before him, his scaled fingers gripping the edge of his command chair. The readings made no sense. His fleet of 12 warships had been conducting a routine patrol along the outer edge of Coalition space when the sensors picked up something that shouldn't exist. "Not here, not now. Commander, the readings are confirmed," his sensor officer reported, her voice trembling slightly. "It's the swarm." Vekthor felt his blood run cold. The swarm was a nightmare that most civilizations only knew from history files. They were an organic hive mind that consumed entire planets, leaving nothing but dead rocks behind. The last major swarm incursion had occurred 300 years ago, and it had taken the combined might of the entire Galactic Coalition to drive them back into the void. Since then, there had been only silence from that direction of space. "How many ships?" Vekthor asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Over 200 vessels, sir, and they're heading straight for us." Vekthor's crew looked at him with wide eyes. They all knew what this meant. 12 ships against 200 was not a battle. It was a massacre waiting to happen. The swarm vessels were already visible on the long-range sensors, moving like a swarm of insects through the darkness of space. Each ship was organic, grown rather than built, with hulls that could regenerate damage and weapons that fired living projectiles. "Send an emergency transmission to Coalition headquarters," Vekthor ordered. "Priority Alpha. Tell them the swarm has returned and provide our coordinates. Make sure they understand the size of this force." His communications officer worked quickly, sending the message through the fastest channels available. But Vekthor knew that help would not arrive in time. The nearest Coalition fleet was 3 days away. His ships had perhaps 3 hours before the swarm reached them. "All ships, battle formation Delta," Vekthor commanded into the fleet-wide channel. "Prepare all weapons. We hold this position as long as we can." His captains acknowledged the order, though Vekthor could hear the fear in their voices. They were all veterans who had fought pirates and raiders, but none of them had ever faced the swarm. The stories passed down through generations painted them as an unstoppable force, a plague that consumed everything in its path. The minutes crawled by as the swarm drew closer. Vekthor watched as his tactical display updated with more information about the enemy fleet. The ships varied in size, from small fighter-sized organisms to massive capital ships the size of small moons. They moved in perfect coordination, responding to the will of the hive mind that controlled them all. "Commander, we're receiving a strange signal," his communications officer suddenly announced. "It's not from any Coalition frequency." "What is it?" Vekthor asked, turning his attention away from the approaching swarm. "It's a voice transmission, sir, but the language is ancient. The computer's having trouble translating it." "Put it through," Vekthor ordered. Static filled the bridge speakers, followed by a voice speaking words that Vekthor's translator struggled to interpret. After a moment, the translation matrix processed the language and converted it into something understandable. "This is Captain Ryan Cooper of the Earth Defense Fleet. Hold your position." "Cavalry's incoming." Vekthor's eyes widened. "Earth?" The translator had to be malfunctioning. Earth was a myth, a legend from ancient times. According to the oldest records in Coalition databases, humans were a primitive species that had destroyed themselves in nuclear warfare long before they achieved faster-than-light travel. They were a cautionary tale told to young civilizations about the dangers of advancing weapons technology before advancing wisdom. "Sir, new contacts appearing on sensors," the tactical officer called out. "Multiple ships emerging from subspace directly between us and the swarm." Vekthor's attention snapped back to the main display. Sure enough, 12 new vessels had appeared from nowhere, materializing from whatever faster-than-light method they used. These ships were unlike anything in Coalition databases. Their hulls were angular and aggressive, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons. They looked old, with scorch marks and battle damage visible even on the long-range sensors. The lead ship was massive, a dreadnought-class vessel that dwarfed even Vekthor's flagship. Its hull was dark gray, and along its side were symbols in a language that the computer identified as Ancient Earth English. The name read EDF Defiance. "Commander, we're receiving another transmission from the lead vessel," the communications officer said. "Put it on screen," Vekthor ordered. The view screen flickered, and suddenly Vekthor was looking at a face he had only seen in ancient historical files. A human. The creature had pale skin with hair that was dark brown mixed with streaks of gray. Its eyes were a sharp blue color, and its face was lined with age and what looked like exhaustion. The human wore a military uniform that was clean but worn, with insignia that Vector didn't recognize. "I'm Captain Ryan Cooper," the human said, speaking in perfect Coalition standard language. "I assume you're wondering what we're doing here." Vector found his voice after a moment of shock. "You're human." "But humans are extinct. The records say your species destroyed itself thousands of years ago." Ryan Cooper's expression didn't change. "The records are wrong. We didn't destroy ourselves. We've been fighting for our survival for the past 800 years. And right now you've got about 200 swarm ships bearing down on your position. So how about we save the history lesson for after we deal with that?" Vector looked at his tactical display. The swarm was now less than an hour away. His 12 ships and the 12 human vessels were all that stood between the swarm and the rest of Coalition space. "What are your intentions?" Vector asked carefully. "To help you survive," Ryan replied simply. "We've been tracking this swarm fleet for 3 months. We led them away from our colony worlds, and we've been hitting them with guerrilla strikes to keep them focused on us. We didn't realize we were heading into occupied space until a few days ago. We couldn't let them massacre another civilization without at least warning you." Vector made a decision. He had no choice, really. If these humans were willing to fight alongside his fleet, he would accept any help he could get. "Very well, Captain Cooper. What do you propose?" Ryan Cooper smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much death and was tired of it. "We propose we show these things why they should have stayed in the dark parts of space. My fleet will take point. Follow our lead and watch how humans fight when their backs are against the wall." The transmission ended, and Vector watched as the human fleet moved forward, placing themselves between his ships and the approaching swarm. He didn't know if these humans were legends or madmen, but in that moment, he was grateful they were here. Ryan Cooper stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the swarm fleet grow larger on the tactical display. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations with practiced efficiency. They had done this dance hundreds of times before, but it never got easier. Each battle could be their last. "Lisa, status report," Ryan said to his tactical officer. Major Lisa Grant looked up from her console, her brown hair tied back in a tight bun. "All weapon systems online. Missile tubes loaded. Point defense ready." "We're as ready as we'll ever be, sir." Ryan nodded. Lisa had been with him since the beginning, since the day Earth fell to the swarm 800 years ago. Not literally, of course. She was young, in her 30s, but her family had been fighting alongside his for generations. They had all been born on colony ships, raised in war, trained from childhood to fight an enemy that never stopped coming. "Jake, how's our formation looking?" Ryan asked his navigator. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was the youngest officer on the bridge, barely 25 years old. His fingers danced across his controls as he monitored the fleet's position. "We're in good shape, Captain. All ships are holding formation. The Coalition fleet is maintaining position behind us like you ordered." Ryan turned his attention to the view screen, which showed the alien commander he had spoken with earlier. Vector looked nervous, which was understandable. The Saurian commander probably thought he was dreaming. Humans were supposed to be extinct after all. "Captain Cooper," Vector's voice came through the speakers. "My officers are requesting more information about your fleet and your tactics. We want to coordinate our efforts effectively." Ryan considered this for a moment. The Coalition forces used traditional military tactics based on long-range energy weapons and defensive formations. It was effective against most enemies, but the swarm wasn't most enemies. The swarm adapted, learned, and overwhelmed through sheer numbers. "Commander Vector, your ships should focus on long-range support," Ryan said. "Target any swarm vessels that break through our formation. Don't try to engage them up close. Their organic hulls regenerate too quickly for sustained fire to be effective, unless you concentrate your entire fleet on single targets." "And what will your ships do?" Vector asked. Ryan smiled grimly. "We're going to do what we've been doing for 800 years. We're going to hurt them in ways they don't expect." He cut the transmission before Vector could ask more questions. There wasn't time to explain centuries of hard-learned lessons about fighting the swarm. The Coalition would have to learn by watching. "All ships, this is Cooper," Ryan announced on the fleet-wide channel. "You know the drill. Pattern Omega-7. Make them pay for every inch of space." Acknowledgements came back from his other captains. The Vengeance, commanded by his old friend, Commander Steve Johnson. The Relentless, under Captain Daniel Hayes. 10 other ships, all bearing names that spoke of humanity's fury and determination, defiance, vengeance, relentless, fury, retribution. Each name was a promise to the swarm that humanity would never stop fighting. "Captain, the swarm is entering weapons range," Lisa announced. 60 seconds to contact." Ryan took a deep breath. This was always the worst part, the waiting before the chaos began. He thought about the colony worlds hidden in deep space, the places where human children grew up never seeing Earth, never walking on the homeworld their ancestors had been forced to abandon. Those children deserved a future without constant fear. That was why his fleet had led the swarm here, away from the colonies. If they had to reveal themselves to another civilization, at least it would serve a purpose. "All ships, weapons free," Ryan ordered. "Let's show them what humans can do." The swarm hit them like a tidal wave. The organic ships surged forward, firing projectiles that were alive and writhing. The Defiance's point defense systems opened up, creating a wall of gunfire that shredded the incoming fire. But some got through, slamming into the shields and hull with wet, sickening sounds. "Return fire," Lisa commanded. "All missile batteries, launch." The Defiance shuddered as hundreds of missiles erupted from its launch tubes. These weren't normal missiles. They were kinetic kill vehicles, designed to punch through organic hulls before detonating nuclear warheads inside the swarm ships. The missiles streaked across space, weaving and dodging as the swarm tried to shoot them down. Explosions blossomed throughout the swarm formation as the missiles found their targets. Entire swarm vessels came apart, their organic matter freezing in the vacuum of space. But the swarm barely slowed down. For every ship destroyed, 3 more pushed forward. "Jake, bring us about," Ryan ordered. "Heading 270 full speed. Take us through their left flank." "Sir, that will take us right into the middle of them," Jake protested. "I know," Ryan said calmly. "That's the point." The Defiance turned hard, its engines flaring as it accelerated directly toward the swarm. The other human ships followed, maintaining formation. It was a maneuver that would seem insane to any traditional military commander. But Ryan knew the swarm's weakness. They relied on overwhelming force and superior numbers. They expected enemies to fall back to maintain distance. They didn't expect prey to charge directly at them. The Defiance plunged into the swarm formation, its guns firing in all directions. Lisa coordinated the targeting, making sure no weapon was idle for even a second. The ship rocked under repeated impacts, but the armor held. Around them, the other human vessels followed the same pattern, creating chaos in the swarm's organized attack. "Now," Ryan said quietly. Lisa pressed a button on her console. From each human ship, thousands of small drones launched, flooding the space around them. The drones were simple machines with a single purpose: to attach themselves to swarm vessels and explode. They swarmed over the organic ships like mechanical locusts, detonating in chains of fire. On his view screen, Ryan could see Vector's shocked expression as the Coalition commander watched the battle unfold. The human tactics were brutal, aggressive, and completely unlike anything in Coalition military doctrine. But they were effective. The swarm formation was breaking apart, confused by the sudden aggression. "Hull breach on Deck 7, a damage report came in." "Sealing now. Casualties?" Ryan asked. 3 wounded, none critical," came the response. Ryan nodded. They had been lucky this time. He watched as the swarm began to adapt, their ships pulling back to reform their lines. The battle was far from over. "Dr. Richards, prepare medical bay for wounded," Ryan said into the intercom. "We're going to have Coalition casualties soon, and I want us ready to help them." "Understood, Captain," came Dr. Amy Richards' voice. "We'll treat anyone who needs help." That was important to Ryan. Despite 800 years of war, despite the hatred they had for the swarm, humans still valued life. They still cared about protecting others. That was what separated them from the monsters they fought. "Commander Vector," Ryan opened a channel to the Coalition fleet. "Now would be a good time for your ships to target those command organisms we've exposed. The big ones in the center. If we take those out, the rest will lose coordination." There was a pause, then Vector's voice came back, filled with determination. "Understood, Captain. All Coalition ships, focus fire on the designated targets." Ryan watched as brilliant beams of energy lanced out from the Coalition fleet, striking the massive swarm command ships. The humans had created the opening. Now it was time to see if the Coalition could exploit it. The battle raged on. and Ryan felt a strange sense of hope. For 800 years, humanity had fought alone in the darkness. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to anymore. The battle had been raging for 2 hours and space was filled with debris from both sides. Commander Vector watched his tactical display in amazement as the human fleet continued their aggressive assault on the swarm. His own ships had already taken heavy damage, with 2 vessels critically wounded and limping to the rear of the formation. The swarm's regenerating hulls and overwhelming numbers should have crushed both fleets by now, but the humans fought with a ferocity that defied logic. "Commander, the human vessel Relentless is requesting permission to use our ship as cover," his communications officer reported. "Granted," Vector said immediately. He had learned quickly that questioning human tactics was pointless. They knew how to fight this enemy better than anyone. The Relentless, a heavy cruiser commanded by Captain Daniel Hayes, swooped behind Vector's flagship, using the larger vessel's shields to protect itself while its crew made emergency repairs. Vector could see burn marks and hull breaches along the human ship's side, but it was still fighting, still launching missiles at every swarm vessel that came close. "Sir, look at this," his tactical officer said, highlighting something on the display. "The humans are playing some kind of audio transmission across all frequencies." Vector listened. At first it sounded like random noise, but then he realized it was music. Human music from their ancient homeworld. The sound was strange, with instruments he didn't recognize and vocals that rose and fell in patterns that seemed almost violent. It was loud, aggressive, and completely out of place in a space battle. "What is the purpose of this?" Vector asked. "I believe they're trying to disrupt the swarm's communication," his science officer suggested. "The swarm uses biological frequencies to coordinate their hive mind. This music might be interfering with those frequencies." It was insane. It was ridiculous. But as Vector watched, he saw the swarm formation begin to lose cohesion. Ships that should have been working together started firing at random angles, missing their targets. The hive mind was being disrupted by ancient human music. "Brilliant," Vector muttered. On the Defiance's bridge, Lieutenant Commander Kate Phillips monitored her drone swarms. She was responsible for coordinating the thousands of small attack drones that the human fleet deployed. Each drone had basic programming and a simple mission: find a swarm ship and explode. But Kate had refined the programming over years of combat, teaching the drones to work together, to choose the most effective targets, to maximize damage. "Drone Wave 7 is away," she reported to Captain Cooper, "targeting the cluster at coordinates 447. "Confirmed," Ryan said. "Nice work, Kate." Kate allowed herself a small smile. She had been fighting the swarm since she was 18 years old, fresh out of the academy on one of the colony worlds. Now, 15 years later, she was one of the best tactical coordinators in the fleet. She understood the swarm's patterns, their tendencies, their weaknesses. "Captain, I'm seeing an opportunity," Kate said, studying her displays. "If we can push the swarm ships toward that asteroid field at bearing 190, we can use the debris as weapons." Ryan looked at the tactical map, then nodded. "Do it. Coordinate with Hayes and Johnson." Kate opened channels to the other ships. "Relentless, Vengeance, this is Defiance Tactical. I'm sending you a flight plan. We're going to herd these things into that asteroid field and let nature do some of our work." "Understood," came Captain Hayes' voice. "We're ready." The 3 ships began a coordinated maneuver, firing at specific angles to force the swarm vessels to change course. It was like herding animals, pushing them toward the asteroid field. The swarm ships tried to resist, but the constant pressure from multiple directions left them with few options. When the first swarm vessels entered the asteroid field, they collided with massive rocks at high speed. Their organic hulls, which could regenerate from energy weapons, shattered on impact with solid matter. More ships followed, crashing into asteroids or each other in their confusion. "It's working," Kate reported. "We've destroyed at least 30 ships with minimal ammunition expenditure." But the swarm was learning. They always learned. The remaining ships began to adapt, changing their flight patterns to avoid the human ships' herding tactics. New vessels pushed forward from the rear of their formation, replacing the losses. "Captain, we have a problem," Lisa announced from her station. "The swarm is adapting to our missile patterns. Their point defense is getting more effective," Ryan frowned. This was always the problem with fighting the swarm. They learned fast, absorbed tactics, and adjusted. Switch to pattern Delta 3. Random intervals, mixed payloads. Keep them guessing. Meanwhile, in the fighter bay of the Defiance, Captain Daniel Hayes' younger brother, Lieutenant Commander Scott Hayes prepared to launch with his squadron. Scott commanded a group of 12 fighter pilots, men and women who flew small, fast ships directly into the teeth of the swarm formations. All pilots. This is Hayes, Scott said over the squadron channel. We're launching in 30 seconds. Target those organic weapon nodes on the capital ships. Hit fast, hit hard, and get out before they can track you. The pilots acknowledged, their voices calm despite the danger they faced. Scott had flown with these people for years. They trusted each other with their lives every single day. The launch bay doors opened and the fighters shot out into space like bullets. Scott's fighter was smaller than a coalition shuttle, but packed with weapons and protected by powerful shields. He immediately banked left, leading his squadron in a wide arc around a cluster of swarm ships. Weapons hot, Scott announced. Targeting solution locked. Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. 12 fighters fired their missiles simultaneously at the same target, a massive swarm capital ship. The missiles converged on a series of bulbous growths along the ship's hull, the organic weapons that fired living projectiles. The explosions tore through the growths, crippling the ship's offensive capabilities. Good shooting, Scott said. Moving to next target. The squadron danced through space, weaving between swarm vessels, firing and dodging in a deadly ballet. Scott lost himself in the rhythm of combat, his hands moving automatically on the controls while his mind processed threats and opportunities. This was what he was born to do. But then his warning system screamed. A swarm fighter, smaller than the capital ships but still deadly, had locked onto his tail. Scott twisted his fighter into a hard turn, pulling G-forces that would have crushed a human from ancient Earth. Modern humans, adapted through genetic modifications and augmentations designed for space combat, could withstand much more. I've got a tail, Scott announced. Can't shake him. Coming around, another pilot responded. Hold steady for 3 more seconds. Scott gritted his teeth and maintained his course while the swarm fighter fired at him. His shields absorbed the first hits but were weakening fast. Then his wingman swooped in from above, destroying the swarm fighter with a well-placed burst of gunfire. Thanks, Julie, Scott said. Anytime, Lieutenant Julie Parker replied. Now let's get back to work. Back on the Defiance, Dr. Amy Richards worked in the medical bay, treating wounded crew members from both human and coalition ships. The coalition had begun transferring their critically wounded to the Defiance after discovering that human medical technology was more advanced than their own. 800 years of warfare had forced humanity to become very good at treating injuries. Hold still, Amy told a Saurian engineer whose arm had been badly burned. This is going to sting. She applied a regenerative gel that would help the alien tissue heal faster. The Saurian hissed in pain but held still. Amy worked quickly and efficiently, moving from patient to patient. Around her, her medical staff did the same, treating humans and aliens side by side without hesitation. A young human ensign was brought in with a broken leg. How bad is it, Doc? He asked. You'll be fine, Amy assured him. I'll have you back on duty in 2 days. She set the bone using a combination of advanced technology and old-fashioned medical skill. The ensign would make a full recovery. Most of them did these days. The mortality rate from injuries had dropped significantly over the past few generations as medical technology improved. Amy paused for a moment, looking around at all the patients. This was why they fought, not just for revenge against the swarm, but to protect life, to save people, to make sure that no one else had to lose their world like humanity had lost Earth. Dr. Richards, incoming wounded from the coalition ship Aurora, a nurse called out. Multiple casualties. Prep Surgical Bay 2, Amy ordered. Let's save some lives. The battle entered its 4th hour, and both sides had taken terrible losses. 3 human ships had been destroyed completely, their crews lost to the void. 5 more were badly damaged and could barely fight. The coalition fleet had fared slightly better under the protection of the human vessels, but they too had suffered casualties. The swarm, however, still had over 100 ships in fighting condition. Ryan Cooper stood on the bridge of the Defiance, studying the tactical display with growing concern. His ship had taken severe damage. Entire sections were exposed to vacuum. The shields were failing, and the main engines were running at only 60% capacity. Around him, his crew worked desperately to keep the ship operational, but they were running out of options. Captain, I need to show you something, Lisa said quietly, pulling up a projection that only he could see. Ryan looked at the data and felt his heart sink. The swarm was repositioning, gathering their remaining forces for a final massive push. If they succeeded, they would overwhelm the human and coalition defenders and continue on to the populated systems beyond. Billions of lives were at stake. We need to thin their numbers significantly, Lisa said, but we don't have enough firepower left to do it conventionally. Ryan knew what she was suggesting. There was one tactic left, one final desperate move that might save the coalition worlds, but it would require a sacrifice that he didn't want to ask anyone to make. "Get me Commander Johnson," Ryan said quietly. A moment later, Steve Johnson's face appeared on a small screen. The commander of the Vengeance looked tired, his face streaked with sweat and smoke. Behind him, Ryan could see damage control teams working frantically. "Ryan," Steve said, "I know that look. What are you thinking?" "We need someone to make a run into the heart of their formation," Ryan said. "Overload the reactors and take out as many of them as possible. Create an opening for the rest of the fleet to exploit." Steve was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "How many ships?" "3 should do it," Ryan said. "The Vengeance, the Fury, and the Retribution. You'll need to coordinate the timing perfectly." "I understand," Steve said. There was no anger in his voice, no resentment. He had known this day might come. Every captain in the human fleet knew that someday they might be asked to make the ultimate sacrifice. "I'll coordinate with Captains Lewis and Garcia." "Steve," Ryan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry," Steve smiled sadly. "Don't be. We all knew the deal when we signed up. Besides, someone has to make sure these things don't reach the colonies. Might as well be us." The transmission ended. Ryan stood silently for a moment, feeling the weight of command crushing down on him. He had just sentenced 300 people to death. Good people, friends, some he had known for decades. "Captain," Jake said softly, "it's the right call. It's the only call." Ryan nodded but didn't trust himself to speak. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Steve Johnson addressed his crew over the internal communications system. "All hands, this is the captain. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We've been given a mission, and it's a one-way trip. We're going to take the Vengeance into the heart of the swarm formation and overload our reactor. The explosion will take out a significant portion of their fleet and give everyone else a chance to survive." He paused, letting the words sink in. Around the ship, 300 crew members processed what they had just heard. Some cried. Some prayed to whatever gods their families had believed in. Some simply nodded and went back to work. "I know this isn't what any of us wanted," Steve continued, "but this is what we trained for. This is why humanity has survived for 800 years. Because when it mattered, people were willing to stand up and say, not one step further. Today, we're those people. Today, we make sure that no one else loses their home like we lost Earth." In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Ben Carter began preparing the reactor for overload. It was delicate work. Overload it too slowly and the swarm might destroy the ship before it could detonate. Overload it too quickly and they might explode before reaching the optimal position. "How long do we have?" his assistant asked. "Once we start the overload sequence, about 10 minutes, Ben said. "That's how long it will take to get into position and for the reaction to reach critical mass. That's not much time." "It's enough," Ben said calmly. He had made peace with his fate years ago. He had known since he was a child that he would probably die fighting the swarm. At least this way, his death would mean something. On the bridge of the Defiance, Ryan watched as 3 human ships broke formation and accelerated toward the swarm. The Vengeance, the Fury, and the Retribution moved in perfect synchronization, their engines burning bright as they built up speed. "All ships, concentrate fire on the swarm vessels around the Suicide Run," Ryan ordered. "Give them a clear path." The remaining human ships and the coalition fleet opened fire, creating a corridor of destruction through the swarm formation. The 3 doomed vessels raced through the opening, their point defense systems working overtime to shoot down incoming fire. Steve Johnson sat in his command chair, watching the swarm ships grow larger on his view screen. Beside him, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Megan Foster, monitored their approach vector. 2 minutes to optimal position, Megan reported. Her voice was steady, professional. She had been with Steve for 5 years, and in that time, they had become close friends. "Megan," Steve said quietly, "I want you to know it's been an honor serving with you." "The honor was mine, sir," Megan replied. Around them, the bridge crew worked in silence, each person focused on their task. They were going to die, but they were going to die as they had lived, doing their duty, protecting others, fighting for a future they would never see. The three ships reached the center of the swarm formation, surrounded by organic vessels on all sides. The swarm had realized what was happening and was trying to destroy the human ships before they could complete their mission, but it was too late. Reactor critical, Ben Carter reported from engineering. 10 seconds to detonation. Steve opened a final transmission to the fleet. This is Commander Johnson. Tell the colonies we did our job. Tell them humanity doesn't give up. Tell them the three ships exploded simultaneously. The detonations were so massive that they registered on sensors across the entire system. Nuclear fire consumed dozens of swarm vessels instantly, and the shockwaves destroyed dozens more. The carefully organized swarm formation shattered, ships tumbling through space, burning and broken. On the Defiance's bridge, Ryan watched the explosions fade, feeling tears on his face. Around him, his crew stood in silence, honoring the sacrifice of their comrades. "Captain?" Lisa said softly. "We have an opening. The swarm command organisms are exposed." Ryan wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders. Steve and the others had given them this chance. They couldn't waste it. "All ships, this is Cooper," Ryan said, his voice carrying across every human and coalition vessel. "Target the command organisms. Fire everything you have. We end this now. For the vengeance, for the fury, for the retribution, for everyone we've lost." The combined fleet opened fire, every weapon blazing. Energy beams and missiles converged on the massive swarm command ships, the biological brains that controlled the hive mind. The creatures had regenerated from previous damage, but they couldn't regenerate fast enough to survive this concentrated assault. One by one, the command organisms died, their organic hulls rupturing under the sustained firepower. As each one perished, portions of the swarm fleet lost coordination, ships drifting aimlessly or firing randomly. "The swarm is breaking," Vector reported, his voice filled with amazement. "They're retreating." Ryan watched as the surviving swarm vessels turned and fled, abandoning the battlefield. The humans had won, but the victory tasted of ashes in his mouth. 300 people had died to make this possible, 300 souls who would never go home. The battlefield was quiet now, filled only with debris and the slow drift of wreckage. The swarm had fled into deep space, their formation broken and their numbers reduced by more than half. The surviving human and coalition ships hung in space, battered and exhausted, conducting rescue operations and searching for survivors. Ryan Cooper stood in the observation deck of the Defiance, looking out at the stars. Behind him, the bridge crew was working to repair the ship's systems and coordinate with the other vessels. But Ryan needed a moment alone, a moment to process what they had just been through. The door opened and Dr. Amy Richards entered. She looked as tired as Ryan felt, her medical scrub stained with blood from a dozen different species. She had been working nonstop for 6 hours, treating the wounded and comforting the dying. "We lost 63 crew members," Amy said softly, standing beside him, "including everyone on the 3 ships that made the suicide run. Total casualties across the fleet are over 400 dead and 200 wounded." Ryan nodded. He had already seen the numbers, but hearing them spoken aloud made them more real. "The coalition lost 800 crew members," Amy continued, "but it would have been tens of thousands if we hadn't been here. Millions if the swarm had reached their core worlds." "I know," Ryan said, "but that doesn't make it easier." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the rescue shuttles move between ships. "Commander Vector wants to speak with you," Amy said. "He's been requesting a meeting for the past hour." Ryan sighed. He knew this conversation was coming. "All right, let's get it over with." Minutes later, Ryan stood in the communications room watching as Vector's image appeared on the screen. The Saurian commander looked different than he had at the start of the battle. The fear and uncertainty were gone, replaced by respect and something that looked like awe. "Captain Cooper," Vector said, bowing his head slightly, "on behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I offer my deepest gratitude. Without your intervention, my fleet would have been destroyed and the swarm would have continued into our territory. You saved millions of lives today." "We did what needed to be done," Ryan said simply. "Nevertheless, we are in your debt," Vector continued. "The Coalition Council has been informed of these events. They are requesting an immediate meeting with your leadership, We wish to offer humanity full membership in the Galactic Coalition. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Membership in the Coalition would mean resources, allies, support. It would mean humanity no longer had to fight alone. But it also meant revealing the locations of their hidden colony worlds, trusting strangers with the survival of their species. I need to discuss this with my fleet commanders and our colonial governments, Ryan said. This isn't a decision I can make alone. I understand, Vector said. But Captain, I must tell you something. In all my years of service, I have never seen anyone fight like your people did today. The courage, the sacrifice, the determination. The galaxy needs warriors like you. The swarm is still out there, and they will return. Next time we should face them together. After the transmission ended, Ryan called a meeting with his surviving captains. They gathered in the Defiance's conference room, their faces showing the strain of the battle. Captain Hayes was there, though his ship was barely functional. Kate Phillips attended, representing the tactical officers. Lieutenant Morrison sat beside Major Lisa Grant, and several other senior officers filled the remaining seats. You all heard Vector's offer, Ryan began. The Coalition wants us to join them. I need to know what you think. We can't keep running forever, Captain Hayes said. We've been fighting for 800 years. Our ships are falling apart. Our resources are limited, and every battle costs us people we can't replace. The Coalition could give us what we need to actually win this war instead of just surviving it. But can we trust them? Kate asked. We don't know these people. What if they decide humans are too dangerous? What if they try to control us or take our technology? Those are valid concerns, Lisa said. But consider the alternative. We continue as we are, fighting alone, losing ships and people with every encounter. Eventually the swarm will find our colonies. What happens then? Jake Morrison spoke up. My parents died fighting the swarm, my grandparents too. I've spent my entire life on warships running and fighting. I've never seen Earth except in old videos. None of us have. Maybe it's time we stopped running and started building something permanent, something that lasts. The room fell silent as everyone considered his words. Jake was right. Most of the people in the human fleet had never known peace. They had been born in war and expected to die in war. But it didn't have to be that way. I think we should accept, Amy said. Everyone turned to look at her. I'm a doctor. I save lives. That's what I do. And today I saved Coalition lives alongside human lives. They bleed the same. They feel pain the same. They're not so different from us. If we join the Coalition, we can save more lives. We can protect more people. Isn't that what we've been fighting for all this time? Ryan looked around at the faces of his officers. He saw hope there, mixed with the exhaustion and grief. Hope for something better. Hope for a future. All right, Ryan said. But we do this on our terms. We'll join the Coalition, but they need to help us locate and protect our colony worlds. They need to share their resources and technology. And they need to understand that humanity doesn't back down from a fight. The officers nodded in agreement. Over the next few days, as the fleet made repairs and recovered from the battle, humans and Coalition crew members worked side by side. Barriers began to break down as people from different species helped each other, shared meals, and exchanged stories. The Coalition officers were amazed by human resilience and creativity. The humans were surprised to discover that the rest of the galaxy wasn't so different from them. Jake Morrison found himself working with a young Saurian navigator, teaching her some of the unconventional maneuvers he had used during the battle. She was eager to learn, asking questions and taking notes. Your people are incredible, she said. The way you flew through that asteroid field, the timing required to make those turns. It shouldn't be possible, Jake shrugged. When you've been fighting for survival your whole life, you learn to do impossible things. But you know what? I think we can teach you. I think your people can learn our tactics, and maybe we can learn from you too. In the medical bay, Amy worked alongside Coalition doctors, sharing techniques and comparing medical knowledge. She discovered that while the Coalition had more advanced diagnostic tools, humans had developed better trauma treatment methods through necessity. Together, they could combine their knowledge and save even more lives. Finally, Ryan stood once again in the communications room, this time facing not just Vector but the entire Coalition Council. Representatives from 7 different species looked at him, curiosity and respect in their various eyes. Captain Cooper, the council leader said, "We have reviewed the battle records and discussed your proposal. The Galactic Coalition officially extends an invitation for humanity to join as full members. We will provide resources to help locate and protect your colony worlds. We will share our technology and our knowledge. In return, we ask that humanity shares its experience fighting the swarm and stands with us to defend the galaxy. Ryan took a deep breath. This was the moment that would change everything. 800 years of isolation were about to end. On behalf of humanity and our colony worlds, we accept, Ryan said. But understand this, we've been fighting alone for a long time. We've lost our homeworld, countless lives, and we've made sacrifices that no one should have to make. We join you not as subordinates, but as equals. We fight together, we survive together, and we build a future together. The council leader nodded. We would expect nothing less from a species that has survived what yours has endured. Welcome to the Galactic Coalition, Captain Cooper. Welcome home. Later that evening, Jake Morrison stood in the navigation room, plotting courses on a star chart. The chart showed coalition space, all the known systems and trade routes. But he expanded it, adding the coordinates of the hidden human colonies scattered across deep space. For the first time in 800 years, those colonies would be connected to something larger, protected by more than just their secrecy. He marked a course that would take the fleet to the nearest human colony world, a place called New Hope. From there, they would spread the news. Humanity was no longer alone. They had allies now. They had a future. Jake thought about the 300 people who had died in the battle, about Commander Johnson and the crew of the Vengeance. They had sacrificed everything so that humanity could have this chance. He made a silent promise to them that their deaths would not be in vain. On the observation deck, Ryan Cooper stood with Amy Richards and Lisa Grant, looking out at the stars. The Defiance was battered and scarred, but it was still flying. The fleet was smaller than it had been, but it was still intact. And most importantly, humanity was no longer fighting alone. What do you think comes next? Amy asked. I think we rebuild, Ryan said. We find our colonies, we bring them into the coalition, and we prepare. The swarm is still out there, and they'll come back. But next time we'll be ready. Next time we won't be alone.